reason number 33 to get a Nissan. The cold. Because winter isn't done with us yet. Good thing the 2026 Nissan Rogue was built to conquer all conditions. With intelligent all-wheel drive, standard heated front seats, heated steering wheel, and heated mirrors, you can leave the worst of winter out in the cold. Lease the 2026 Nissan Rogue S starting at 0.4% for up to 36 months. Includes a 0.5% loyalty rebate for qualifying Nissan customers. Until March 2nd on approved credit. Conditions apply. Details at Nissan.
Justine McIntyre here, sitting in for Elias today. We've heard a lot about this recently, data breaches, whether it's banks or other companies that use your data. There seem to be more and more of these stories cropping up. And recently we found out from the Commission d'accès à l'information, the Access to Information Committee, reported a staggering 531 data breach incidents over the past year, but not a single fine or sanction has been imposed. These are some high-profile cases affecting clients of major hotels, major companies. So here to speak with us about that now is Elodie Meyer. She's a cybersecurity lawyer. Welcome to the show, Elodie.
Hi, Justine. Thanks for having me.
All right. So first of all, how come there have not been any fines or sanctions imposed, given that there have been 531 data breaches? What's going on?
Yeah, we're still waiting on those. For a bit of context, the law came into force September of 2023, so it's been just over a year. And when it did, the commission, the privacy commissioner in Quebec, so Commission d'accès à l'information, had announced actually from the beginning that the first year they wouldn't be imposing sanctions, that they would take more of a compliance approach with companies and just make sure they have a roadmap towards compliance, but not necessarily imposing sanctions to start. So they would just want to help companies to actually comply with the law without putting financial penalties just yet.
Now, you're referring to Quebec's Law 25?
Yes.
Is that the act? Okay, the act to modernize legislative provisions as regards the protection of personal information. So step one for this new law is just, my understanding from what you just said there, is that they're just trying to get an idea of how big of an issue this is before acting on it.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea there. It's to see how big of an issue it is, but it's also to give time to companies to comply.
Okay.
I mean, we would expect big companies with a lot of financial and human resources to be compliant faster. But the reality is that all SMBs don't necessarily have the financial or human resources to be able to comply or become compliant as fast as it was required by the law. So the idea here is that since this law is still fairly new, there's some leeway that's being given in order to encourage companies to comply rather than punish them from the start. And this Bill 25, one of the provisions of this bill is what made mandatory the signaling of cyber incidents that implicate personal information to the Commission d'accès à l'information. Now, out of the 500 and some reports that they've received, they've only been through about 300 of those. They haven't been through all 500 yet, so it is possible that sanctions could come on some of the more important cases, the bigger ones, and they'll be looking at companies, their intentions, and if there was any negligence. And obviously, if there was negligence, then in those cases, there's a bigger chance that sanctions could be imposed. But the reality remains, right? They said that the first year they wouldn't be imposing sanctions. They would really just, try to push for compliance. So it is very possible that at the end of the investigation on these 500 first, signaling of incidents, that no one actually gets a fine from that, and that just comes in, maybe a year or two down the road.
How can organizations better prepare then, now that they've been given this time? What should they be doing to prepare to make sure that these breaches don't happen?
Oh, that's a complex question in the sense where there's a lot of things that need to be done. Bill 25, of course, talks about breaches, but it's also, consents to collecting personal information. It's data minimization, meaning companies shouldn't have personal information that they don't need for legitimate purposes within their business. It's a lot of different things in the law that come together in order to, try to better protect the personal information of the people. And specifically for cyber incidents, it's really about, making sure that the environment is secure, that the people, the employees, the people that are working with the information are properly trained, and that they know, how to look out for certain types of incidents, certain types of cyber attacks that usually come on initially as just, a general cyber attack. It doesn't always specifically aim at personal information, but here this is what's being looked at by the Commission d'accès à l'information. It's specifically cyber attacks that will look at private information, PII as they call it, personally identifiable information, but also other types of events that are not necessarily cyber attacks. For example, an employee that would mistakenly email a list of names to the wrong person, just to give a simple example.
Yeah.
That would also fall under those notifications of to the Commission d'accès à l'information.
Okay. So some of it is about training and making sure that employees are handling data correctly, but some of it, and here's something that you brought up, data minimization. Some of it is that as a consumer, on the consumer end of things, I often wonder why I'm being asked to give away so much information. Just to get a card for a store, like a points card for a store, for a coffee shop or something like that, and they ask you all kinds of questions, and you think, is this normal that they're asking me this? How are they going to be protecting this information? And I think that we've become, as consumers, so numb to it that we just give away our information now.
That's exactly it. There's a name for that. It's consent fatigue is what they call it.
Consent fatigue. Yeah, exactly right. So does this law then provide for guidelines on limiting the amount of data that companies can ask for?
Absolutely. And what we do see is that companies aren't quite compliant with it yet. But the law does provide for certain criteria. So they say that that the information has to be collected for an important and legitimate, serious business purpose. That they can't just collect information just to have it, just in case, like we used to do. It also says that if once that information has been, like, once it's used for the purposes that we collected it initially, the company's supposed to destroy that information afterhand. And that's something that we see that rarely happens. Destruction of information doesn't actually happen when it should be happening. And then, you were mentioning points, reward systems and things like that. Sometimes companies will think that for them, it's a legitimate business purpose because they want to, for example, collect statistics to know where their consumers come from, right? Like they'll ask you for your postal code and you wonder why do you need my postal code? And for them, the idea is just, demographics. And the reality is, well, is that really an important and legitimate business interest? Most of the time it isn't. And it depends on how specific they're being with that information as well.
I've often noticed that just at the checkout, if you go to a store and as you're checking out, they'll just quickly slip in postal code and I just say, nope.
Yeah.
Or they'll ask for a phone number or all manner of information. And, it wasn't so long ago, like maybe 10 years ago. Remember when we started doing online shopping, people were really reticent to give away information. People were reticent to use their credit cards online because there was a feeling that, well, it wasn't something that we'd ever done before. So there were a lot of questions around whether this was safe. And I think companies had to really do a lot to ensure that people felt safe about it. And now, as you said, there's sort of a fatigue that's set in and people just give away all kinds of information without thinking twice about it. I want to ask you just before, because now that I have you here, what are some of the potential penalties that companies could face if they're not handling data correctly?
So penalties can actually be quite severe. The law doesn't really provide for a minimum, or in certain cases does, but it's mostly that it provides for maximum fines.
Okay.
And so administrative fines can go up to $10 million or 2% of worldwide turnover for big companies. And then anything that would be on the penal side of things, so penal fines, penal sanctions could go up to $25 million or 4% of a company's worldwide turnover. And when we say either or, it's the biggest of, right? So a company that would have, that would be making billions of dollars in revenue and would be found guilty under breaching this Bill 25 could, potentially face up to hundreds of millions of dollars of fine.
Well, that's a pretty sizable dissuasive. So, hopefully we'll see companies being a lot more careful about how our data is being handled. Elodie Meyer, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
Elodie Meyer is a cybersecurity lawyer, and she was talking to us about data breaches and what we can do to prevent them.